everybody, and welcome to Guidestone Colorado's High Altitude Garden Series. We're trying to do some of these on really taking advantage of what you might have growing in your garden and moving it forward through some different kinds of home and homestead sort of processing things. So my name is Monica Pless. I'm the Farm to School Director here at the Salve School Garden in Salve, Colorado. And today we're going to talk a little bit through making a simple salve recipe. And Tarin is filming me right now, and then in a little second we'll switch and she'll sort of walk you through all the steps. I got really interested in salves because as a gardener, especially in the spring, my hands crack a lot where I've been in contact with the soil, and so I've gotten better at wearing gloves, but making my own salve has been really helpful as well. And then of course for everybody who lives out in the West, in places where it's really dry like Colorado, having some homemade salve is really helpful for your lips, especially if you're outside all day like we are. The first salve recipe I ever made, I got online. I Googled calendula salve because I had a lot of calendula flowers that year. And I infused them in oil over time, and then I mixed them with beeswax. At the time I wasn't working somewhere where we kept bees, so I went and bought the beeswax from a local herbal apothecary, along with some essential oils to make it smell nice. The essential oils are optional, but it can be nice. So this is a recipe that I've used. I got it off of a website called Mommypotamus, so that's the one I can always find. If I Google calendula salve recipe, one of them that comes up is Mommypotamus, and I've had pretty good luck with it, so I stuck with it. The idea is you use about 4 ounces of oil that you've infused whatever herbs you want to use into. And so usually the process that I go through is I dry the herbs first, and then I set them in oil, ideally for a couple of weeks, although you can do it faster in a crock pot if you want to do it overnight with the oil set on low. I've used a lot of calendula. So I have some that I've used from farms that I've grown in the past and dried in a dehydrator, although out here you could pretty much put it on a screen and leave it a little longer and it would dry, and then infused in oil. And then Tarin will talk about some of the other herbs we have as examples. I take that oil that's been infused with the herb, and then I melt some beeswax. You can buy beeswax at stores. You can sometimes get it in like a less processed form from beekeepers or from yourself. You keep your own bees. I usually use a cheese grater to grate it. Just be forewarned that it takes a good amount of hot soapy water to get that beeswax back off your grater. We do enough with beeswax, with candle making at the homestead and making salves, that we have sort of a dedicated beeswax crock pot. So that way any extra beeswax is just used in the next batch. We use that grated beeswax, so it's about 4 ounces of your oil that's been infused, 1/2 ounce of beeswax, and then 5 to 20 drops of any kind of essential oil. And Tarin's going to give you a couple examples. I almost always use lavender essential oil, but if that's not your cup of tea, then you can find another one. Or, like I said, that part is optional. And so if you want to have an unscented salve, that's a great option as well. If you want, this is sort of this 1 to 8, so 8 parts oil to 1 part beeswax is sort of the rough way that I've been going about it over the last several years. You can also make, if you want like a really thick salve, you can put in a little extra beeswax. That might be good if it's going to be one that you're going to put in a small container and have in your pocket, like you don't want it to melt really easily. If you're working in the winter and it's really cold, you might want to make a little bit softer salve that isn't going to be like rock hard trying to get it on your lips or on your skin. And then you might want to have a little bit extra oil and a little less beeswax. So I found this to be a good ratio as a starting point, and then you can always play with it. One thing I will say is that when I am finishing it and pouring it into the tins, I find it helpful to keep stirring it as I'm pouring it into the tins, especially if I've made a big batch and I'm using a lot of little tins. Sometimes otherwise I end up with like the thickest stuff at the beginning, and at the end it's all much thinner, and you can't really tell when you're pouring it because it's melted, so it just moves like oil, and then some of it just never hardened up. So I think we're going to switch places, and Tarin will give you some of the step-by-step instructions and also introduce you to some of the herbs that we are growing here that we're using into salves.
Hello everyone, like Monica said, my name is Tarin Hill and I'm the AmeriCorps Homestead Educator with Guidestone. Today I'll be talking to you all about how to make some salves. So Monica introduced our calendula, and we also have plantain that we dried as well, and yarrow will be a good plant to use for your salves. And as you can see, this is the flower heads for the yarrow. I also went ahead and saved the stems and the leaves because those are just as potent medicinally as well. It just gets a little bit difficult sometimes with the space, so I went ahead and separated them out. And I will explain to you and show you also what it looks like in the wild if you were to forage for some of these herbs yourself, what that might look like and what their uses could be in a salve. So this is what comfrey would look like if you were to ever come across it. It's a really, really huge leaf. As you can see, it's very heavy in water weight. So just so you know, when you dry it, it might take a little bit longer to dry just because there is a lot of water in this leaf. So there's comfrey. Comfrey is a wonderful plant that its taproot actually gets all those wonderful trace minerals down below the ground and bring them back up. So they're not only good for us humans, but they're also really good for your garden as well. So comfrey was also known as knitbone. So the reason why it was known as knitbone is because it was used to help with inflammation and minor bruises and scrapes. It's a very, very good first aid herb to use if you were to make a salve with this. And we have up next is yarrow. So yarrow is a little bit tricky. There are only two main kinds that are really good medicinally, which is this beautiful white yarrow as well as the yellow yarrow. Sometimes you might get the ones in between, the more ornamental ones, but those don't have the great medicinal magic as the white and the yellow yarrow. So make sure you keep an eye out for that as well when you're harvesting in the wild. You also can see that it branches out into different heads of flowers. So as I did here, I went ahead and I separated those out to try to increase how much yarrow I would have in the end. And we also have some wonderful plantain. So a really cool, fun way you can identify plantain in the wild is these wonderful parallel veins that you all can see on the back of this leaf. If you see that, then you know you've come across some awesome plantain. And plantain, just like comfrey, is a little bit heavier in water weight, so be careful when you're drying to keep an eye on it because it might mold in some cases and you don't want to put that into anything medicinally. Plantain is actually known as the band-aid plant. So as you can see how wide this leaf is, this leaf, if you were to, like, say, chew this and make it into a poultice and apply it to a wound, it's more so for like minor cut scrapes and bruises, maybe perhaps. If you were to chew it up, apply it, and you can maybe even as you can see, wrap it around where that wound might be, like a band-aid, and it'd be really good first aid herb as well. And then also, I forgot, the yarrow is really, really good at stopping bleeding. So you can also make a wonderful poultice out of yarrow by chewing it up or smashing it into like a mortar pestle with a rock and apply it to a wound, and it's actually a great way to stop bleeding with just this wonderful, beautiful plant here. And we also have that calendula. Calendula is also a really awesome and amazing first aid herb as well. I do not have any fresh to show you, but just so you know, for calendula, you use the flower heads. For your for anything medicinally, you would use the flower part. And we also have comfrey here. This is what it looks like dried. As you can see, it gets really, really crumbly. But you also too want to make sure that there aren't like any mold growing on there when you dry your herbs also. That's very important. And we also have our wonderful infused oil that we have been letting sit. So when you infuse oil, it's wonderful, and you want to make sure that you leave it sitting in a cool, dark place for about, like, I'd say about 2 to 3 weeks could be really good. And the reason why it has to be cold and dark is because if it was hot, it would actually like bake out all those wonderful essential oils that you want in your salve, and you wouldn't get as potent, I guess, of a salve if it weren't cool and dark. And you also want to make sure you let it sit for a little while, because then it lets all those little goodies come through for you. Alrighty, so first I am going to check my beeswax. Alright, so this here is that crock pot Monica mentioned earlier of our beeswax. So I went ahead and let that melt, and I've already infused this salve, but pro tip, when you also infuse your oil, you also want to make sure you ground down whatever you're using as fine as you can, and that's just to increase the surface area of the plant material that you're using, and so that way that oil can take all the goodness and all the wonderful magical properties of the plants you're putting in there and put it back into that oil. So you can use like I said, a mortar and pestle if you have one. You can use a rock, or you can even just use your fingers, which I did with this. So first step, now that we have our infused oil, we're going to want to run this through some cheesecloth, or whichever kind of cloth you prefer. Would still work wonders. The point of it is to strain it. So you can even use a fine mesh strainer if that works better for you as well. And I am going to strain it into our pot here, which has been dedicated for salve making. And I've also got a rubber band here handy to help me secure my cheesecloth once I get it all poured on there.
Why don't you attach it to the top of that? Hold on, I'm gonna suggest we attach it to the top of this.
Ooh.
And we just like rubber band it right over there so it strains out right as we pour it.
All right. And also too, pro tip, bees will love you. Use beeswax. They smell all the sweetness.
We're having some bee visitors right now.
All right. So we've got that cheesecloth secured onto our container, and we are going to pour it into here. And this is more so of I would say like a rough strain. It's okay if you get a little bit of pieces in there. Sometimes that happens. But you do want to try your best to not get a lot per se, but don't stress either if some do fall in there. That'll be all right. Alrighty, so we've extracted all that goodness from in there. And as you can see, this was actually comfrey and plantain that I put into the salve. So it'll be a nice basic first aid healing salve we'll be creating. And now I'm going to pour a little bit of that beeswax in here. So this container, I would say, was about 8 ounces, the size, but I put about 4 ounces worth of oil in here. And so that ratio that Monica mentioned earlier, that 8 to 1, is pretty a rough estimate. So what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna pour this into here, but it's gonna be about half an ounce of beeswax, so I'm not gonna get too crazy here.
That's good.
Alrighty. So now that we have all that goodness mixed up in here, as you can see, it's hardening immediately. So what I need to do is I need to move my butt and I need to start mixing it up. But another thing too, if you use essential oils, you do want to let it cool down a little bit, because if it's hot and it's like fresh beeswax, it's going to melt those essential oils that you put in there, and you'll lose that wonderful addition as well to your salve. So I'll go ahead and quickly add about, I'd say, I've got some lavender here, so I'll add about 25 drops of lavender to this mix. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, 3, 4, and 5. All right, so now that I've got that mixed in there, what I'm going to do is I am going to pour it into our salve tin. So this is about a 1 ounce tin, and then this is about a 2 ounce tin, and this is about a 4 ounce tin here as well. So I'm going to mix up my goodness and my goopy goop. Like Monica said earlier, you do want to make sure you mix it as you pour. So I'm going to pour it first into that 1 ounce tin, but being careful that I don't over pour. Mix it up. And so now that is our 1 ounce tin. And then now onto our 2 ounce tin. So mix it, mix it. Alright. And then when you fill up your tins, word of caution, do not fill up all the way. If you fill up all the way, it'll make it a little bit harder sometimes to put your lid back on there. And then sometimes too, like in this process of it hardening, it might harden onto your lid and then make it 10 times harder to even get that off of there. So, word to the wise. And now off to our last tin, that 4 ouncer. So, I'm gonna put you back in here. So this is all of our, sorry, my mask. This is all of our wonderful goodness that we've made today. So that was our first aid healing salve. So what you need if you'd like to make a healing salve at home is, of course, your plants. So we have the comfrey, the yarrow, plantain, and calendula as examples. You also don't have to forage. You can just go to the store as well and buy you some pre-weighed and pre-dried herbs to use. And then the beeswax, it can be refined or it can be unrefined. Either way would still work perfectly. There's no right or wrong in that. And you can get to working on your wonderful magic of your salves. So if you guys make this at home, leave a comment at the bottom and let me know how it goes for y'all. I would love to hear about all the wonderful healing salves that you all have planned out there.
I'm gonna switch with you again, Tarin, and I'm just gonna see if there are any questions and also give 1 or 2 other tips. So one other tip is if you don't have a crock pot, you can do this with a double boiler, and if you don't have a double boiler, you can use a small pot on the inside and a larger pot on the outside. Just make sure that you don't get any water from the outer pot, the lower pot that has the boiling water, into your salve mix. And one thing that I find that can be helpful if you have another crock pot that isn't solely dedicated to beeswax is you can mix this together where you're mixing the oil that's infused and the beeswax. You can keep that in a crock pot and pour directly from the crock pot, which sometimes gives you a little more flexibility about how fast you need to get it into your tins because it won't harden quite as fast as it does outside. And then I'll just sort of show you that we have a couple different tins. I find it's a very similar recipe if I wanted to make like a homemade lip balm or chapstick. So sometimes I'll get those, I'll either save an old chapstick container or you can buy those also at like an apothecary or an herb store, the little containers where you can make your own lip balm. I like to use these little 1/2 or 1 ounce tins. They have a slide. I always feel like they're going to come apart in my pocket, but so far they haven't, although don't wash them in the washing machine. And then you can get different sizes. And then sometimes I've also used some of the smaller mason jars for that if I really have like one place where I'm just going to have like a lot of hand salve. But I really like having some of the smaller tins so that I can have something with me in my bag. That's it for today. Next week we'll talk about herbs that you can grow easily in your own home garden. And so some of these herbs might be there and some more. We hope you join us then. And as always, if you're in a place where you're able to and want to support Guidestone, we gratefully accept donations if you're able to. And we also would love to have you follow us on Facebook or sign up for our newsletter at guidestonecolorado.org to learn about some of the other programs we're doing here. And of course, if you're in the Salida area and want to come volunteer, please do. We'd love to have you. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.